why I may have missed it. Increasing the weight limit on trucks has affected some of the bridges in our county, because the wood bridges don't count. They don't go up in weight. The DOT sets the weight, and then they have to quit using those bridges. And I'm talking about log trucks. And it's made a problem for them. They have to go that much further to go around that bridge. Is that taken into effect?
Well, that's a conversation I know. Tommy Carroll, the Southwestern Wood Producers, he's reached out to me, and he's had recommendations too about how to be able to take a more direct route, not so much look at weight limit increases. What I can say is both these bills were dropped after crossover on purpose to try to help us know that they weren't going to pass them, but to know that they're serious about wanting to talk. And ACCG has been asked to kind of take lead on a stakeholder group or a coalition, if you will, on this issue. And my understanding is we've done that in the past. And so we're meeting for the first time next week, and that consists of the rail community, AAA from a safety standpoint, GMA. They'll all be at the table, GDOT. Everybody will be at the table to have that conversation and to really kind of look at some of these issues. And what our hope is can we find a way to address what their end goal is in terms of being able to move trucks more efficiently and potentially get more on the road at a lower cost. Because that's, in the end, that's, let's face it, it's follow the money. They're making money now at the current weight limit. If they want to increase weight limits, it's because they want to make more money. And they'll tell you it takes trucks off the road to alleviate congestion. They'll tell you it creates jobs because they can put more trucks on the road on the back end. Well, you put more trucks on the road, you haven't alleviated congestion. You've created the same problem. So if we can find alternative solutions, ways to avoid the weight limit increase issue, to try to help solve the problem, and that from the port perspective as well, we're going to work together to do whatever we can to make that happen. But as Todd said, I mean, if it has to come down to it, we have our position in there. That's been the will of the membership. Now, if the membership has a different perspective from the last time, then that's something that we'll look at, make those proposals, and vote on in the second meeting. But the goal is to stand our ground here, do what we need to do, but at the same time try to figure out how we can help them from that standpoint. Because you're right that just because they increase the weight doesn't mean the bridge can automatically handle an increased weight, and that does pose a problem.
They just built a new bridge.
Not only does that affect, good point, not only does it affect the businesses, but it affects our school systems, because you got school buses that's got to cross over smaller bridges, and when that happens, those school buses must reroute themselves a different way, which costs more fuel costs. And so in many of our counties, we have county bridges, and that means that that brings in the EPA folks, the bridge folks, and then who's going to be responsible for replacing that bridge? It's usually it falls on the backs of the counties. So keep all these little trinkets in mind, subcommittee for the transportation, as we approach this subcommittee process to iron out these issues and opportunities for us, and how do we maximize the counties in Georgia, the counties working together so we can get the best deal we need that we are dealing with here. Because this particular weight limit is putting a lot of stress on us, and we don't know where the real stress is at the end of the day.
These county bridges are probably, we've had several wrecks in our area.
Yes.
Where the log truck and the one hauling the equipment for the timber industries is taking up over half of the county bridges.
Yes.
While you others, we've had more than our share of wrecks in regard to that.
So, well, your bridges are going to be part of the problem with the axle weight too, because as that transition from the road bed over to the bridge, is the more weight that's on that single axle, the more it's going to beat that bridge out right there. You'll notice your potholes usually start around that joint.
We've got bridges right now with signs that say weight limit 28,000 pounds, or 105 or whatever the timber logs might be. There's a lot of difference there.
Now, bear in mind, most of these trucks here are limited to the National Highway System or other roads designated by GDOT. So some of your smaller county roads, these trucks can't travel down now. But, I mean, it's still an issue on some of your county roads or what have you that are part of this corridor system. Ms. Farrell, did you have a question?
I'd like to suggest a concept that it might work for everybody. If the state wanted to increase the axle limit to expedite
think it,
Problem is, these truckers find them short.
yeah.
I think the gentleman correct, log truck is gonna find the shortest route whether it's across a dirt road or a paved road to get to that point A to B. And they're gonna take it, I mean, they're already tearing up, when they come out of the woods, they're already tearing up the county roads when they turn over their axles to make that turn to get on the road. And they already require $5,000 bond. So when you go to pull a bond, you gotta think that guy that's working in your county for a living, all of the bonds, and he wants to get another bond from another county, and they're gonna find out that you already pulled this bond, and he can't get that bond. So you just about cut him out of work. So, I mean, this thing compounds, the county already takes county roads. It's not the county roads, the state roads we're concerned about. It's the school bus traffic, the log trucks, and other people that use the county roads that are tearing them up. And then they can be responsible. Then it has to come out of supply or general fund.
Well, I'd also contend on the flip side of that timber owners pay a timber tax, and one of the reasons, the justifications for a tax on timber is to help with the roads. So I know, we have a lot of timber in Ben Hill County, and one of the things we're discussing right now is instead of letting the timber tax just arbitrarily go into the general fund, using some of those funds to maintain the roads, because we're in a timber business in Ben Hill County, and we're going to have timber trucks on our roads, and so it's up to us to fix those roads with some of those taxes. So I would say for us that the issue is not necessarily that we're against the weight limits. Obviously, there's a safety issue there. But if the permitting side, like Shaun mentioned, if it's $200 and you pay a $200 one-time fee, that's not going to help many of us out. If you're using those roads on a regular basis and paying a $200 a year, and that General Assembly allocates those funds back to the county, now we're talking about, or whoever has to maintain it, whether it goes into the state fund, because we know that we've been raiding the state funds as well. So as long as the money goes back into fixing the roads that truck tears up, I don't think necessarily we should just take a position against it. But
and that actually is a great segue in one of the comments I was going to make. If you notice, both these bills, they had permits with fees attached to the permits. But one of the things that I'll remind you of and I think I mentioned a little bit earlier with the great state of Georgia, is anytime these fees put in law by the state, they go into the state general fund.
that's correct. So
you're going to hear the comments, hey, we've got this $500 permit fee for port proximate, we've got this $200 fee, let's say we get them to raise it to $500 or $1,000 and make it annual. We can make it $5,000. It doesn't matter if all it is they say, hey, we've got this permit fee and it's going to go back to fixing roads and bridges. If it's not in a constitutional amendment to dedicate those fees to that purpose, then it just goes in the general fund and it's subject to the appropriations process. So in great years in the state for sales tax revenue and everything else, and we might see that money come down. But I know my good colleague back there, Todd, has dealt many of fee fights for tire fees and other fees. And Todd, how often do those fees go back to their originally intended purpose?
Well, there's a lot of them out there very rare.
So I don't think that, from these permitting standpoints, that they're going to treat it any differently.
I mean, we've got another position in the committee. We no longer accept any fees that either counties pay to or impact us, or we support them in General Assembly because it's not a fee. It's a tax. It's a thought, it's a mess.
So this is why, Pat, and I'm lean on you on the chairman, this is why when Shaun comes out of his presentation, I'm going to be coming back asking for those subcommittee members to participate. So this kind of dialogue can continue to take place leading up to our June 19th meeting. And so this is a very critical infrastructure issue. Because as Shaun just mentioned, if you take that $500 on that fee there, times what I heard earlier today, 8,000 trucks per day, that's about $4 million. Now, many of your counties, it takes us more than $2 million to do a road project. So that wouldn't go very far, right? And we have 159 counties. My focus is 159 counties. How do we get revenues to everybody? So we got to really drill down into this, folks, in these subcommittees over the next 4 or 5 weeks and get some potential issues on the table, opportunities on the table, or threats on the table so that we can bring back on the August meeting our platform issues so our team, ACCG team, legislative team, can continue to fight for us at the state legislature, including yourselves. Because one thing I've learned in going down to the state is that if we're not present as counties down there talking to our legislators, they're going to push anything. We have the power as counties. Keep in mind, our state legislators work for us. We do not work for them. And we must seize those opportunities to take advantage of our power and our numbers, 159 counties, over 88,000 employees, over 4,000 elected officials. We got to stick together on this thing and make it work.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to move on to the last issue there quickly, development authorities. As I mentioned before, when we talked about a myriad of the bills that were introduced during session and did not pass, some were good bills that help development authorities, help local governments out in economic development. Others were not so great. What I want to point your attention to is this Senate Resolution 875. This was sponsored by Senator Jack Hill. And you have a sheet there in your folder that says Economic Development and Development Authorities. I kind of provide a quick summary to you there at the beginning. And the purpose of this study committee is to evaluate the reporting of local tax revenues that impact the funding received by local school systems, specifically but not limited to equalization and 5 mil share. The committee will review the tax digest reporting, economic development related revenues paid in lieu of taxes, and any other arrangements that impact local digests such as abatements. The issue and the concern that we have, and quite frankly many people in the economic development community have over this study committee, is it was written so broadly in terms of what they're going to study and what their recommendations could be. The impetus behind this is you've heard a lot, school boards, especially in Metro Atlanta, over this past year and after the announcement of the Braves deal, things of that nature, where the school boards complained about not having a seat at the table on these economic development projects. And when these abatements occur, these other revenues paid in lieu of taxes occur in the county, it has an impact on their revenues. If you've got an East Loss or E-Loss in your county, it impacts that. If in some capacities, it impacts them from their equalization and 5 mil share standpoint, and they want to have a seat at the table. Well, what this study committee purports to do is to look at the idea of having a central repository where you essentially report any of these abatements or revenues paid in lieu of taxes that impact local tax digests, and especially impact the digest as it relates to school boards as well. Have them reported to this centralized agency where they can be seen, and the idea behind it is because the quality basic education funds that the schools have on their side, their formula and their equalization formula is largely based on some of the revenues that they generate within their jurisdiction, within the county. And if it appears as though there's revenues coming in, but there's abatements coming out of there as well, their argument is that the formula is factoring in a higher number than what they're actually receiving because of the abatements. And so therefore, with that formula projecting or utilizing a higher number, they're not receiving as much in equalization as they should. That's kind of the argument they're making, and that's what the purpose of this is to really look at. On one hand, if all they want is a county-wide number that says, hey, in 2014, County A had 15 million in abatements and that's it, that's not that bad. But if they go to seek, in 2014, we had 15 projects that received some kind of abatement or revenue paid in lieu of taxes, and you've got projects A through F that totaled 15 million. Project A was 2 million, Project B was 8 million, Project C was 500,000, whatever the case may be, and you have to break it down by project. Well, those of you who are heavily involved in economic development in your jurisdictions, you can understand right away the impact that's going to have and how many prospects you might lose to other states. And so that's the concern we have behind this study committee, is just how far are they going to go, since it was written broadly. We fought really hard to keep this study committee from being passed. We fought hard to get it limited to the scope of what I mentioned in terms of just one generic number. And I know that this is something that the GEDA had issues with, the Economic Developers Association, they had concerns, DCA had concerns about it, the Georgia Department of Economic Development had concerns about it, and it still got through at the last minute. So it's something we want to keep an eye on. We'll definitely have a presence and be paying attention in those meetings, and if there's an opportunity to provide presentations, we'll seek out our economic development folks as our membership to come and speak and help them understand the impact. I was actually informed by, I think it might have been DCA, it may have been the Economic Developers Association, but my understanding is after this came out and this bill was passed, there were actually a couple of prospects who were in conversations on a smaller scale that got nervous. And next thing you know, we weren't top on the list, and I think in one or two cases they actually ended up choosing another site just because this was sitting out there and it just passed. So that's kind of the danger. Now, these are smaller projects, I understanding, nothing grand scale, nothing that would have made the press, but it's still jobs in your community, it's still investment in your community. So it's something we want to pay attention to. Also, you have in your packet, I'm not going to go into detail on this, but you have a Department of Accounts and Audits report on development authorities that was completed and published in December of 2013. This report, the part of the research behind this was to study development authorities in general, the different types of authorities, the way they were created, the powers that they have, the type of regulation that's there, and really try to dig down and look at whether or not there should be more regulation from a statewide perspective on these development authorities, whether or not there's purpose for as many of them overlapping, and whether or not there should be more of a standardized process for the powers that they have and how their relationship is with their local governments. So I encourage you, if you have some time, to kind of review that report. Some of the legislation that you saw spawned from that report. This resolution, actually 875, Senator Jack Hill said that this report kind of gave him the idea for the resolution. So we've had this report posted on our website, but just in case you haven't had a chance to review it, I wanted to get a copy for you today to look at it, because any legislation that we see coming forward in 2015 and beyond regarding development authorities or economic development in general, you can believe that this report is something that they're going to turn to. And so we want to know where we are with it from a local government standpoint, the impact it's going to have on us potentially, both as the local government and from an economic development standpoint.